The dust from Martha Franklin's boots settled on the wooden planks of the general store as she counted out her coins for flour and sugar. Knowing full well that the young clerk was waiting for her to leave so he could flirt with the pretty 19-year-old daughter of the blacksmith who had just walked in. At 38 years old in the spring of 1878, Martha had become invisible to most men in Ellsworth, Kansas, a fact she had accepted with the same practicality she approached everything else in her life. "That will be $2.15, Miss Franklin," the clerk said, barely glancing at her as his eyes tracked the younger woman browsing the ribbons. Martha handed him the exact change and gathered her purchases, tucking them into her worn canvas bag. She had been running her late father's ranch alone for the past 5 years, ever since he died from a heart attack while mending fence posts. Her mother had passed when Martha was only 12, leaving her to take on the responsibilities of keeping house for her father. By the time she was old enough to think about courting, most of the suitable men had already married younger girls, and her father had needed her too much to spare her for socializing anyway. The spring sun felt warm on her face as she stepped outside, and she paused to adjust the brim of her practical felt hat. The ranch was 3 miles outside of town, and she had left at dawn to make this trip before the day grew too hot. Her horse, a reliable mare named Bess, waited patiently at the hitching post. "Excuse me, madam," a deep voice said from behind her. Martha turned to find a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer looking at her with genuine interest. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair showing distinguished threads of silver at the temples beneath his dusty black hat. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, not a dandy, worn leather chaps over sturdy trousers and a blue cotton shirt that had seen many washings. "Yes," Martha said, her tone cautious. Strange men did not typically approach her. "I am mighty sorry to bother you, but I am new to this area and looking for information about ranches that might be hiring." The owner of the boarding house mentioned a woman named Franklin who runs a spread north of town, and I was wondering if you might know how I could find this place. Martha studied him carefully. She was indeed looking for help. The spring calving season had been brutal, and she had lost 2 newborns because she simply could not be everywhere at once. The fencing needed mending, the barn roof had developed a leak, and she was behind on breaking the young horses to saddle. "I am Martha Franklin," she said directly. "The ranch is mine." The cowboy's expression shifted to one of respect. He removed his hat, revealing the full head of thick dark hair. "Madam, my name is Carson Garrett. I have been working cattle since I was 14 years old, which makes it about 26 years now. I can mend fences, work horses, repair most anything that breaks, and I do not drink to excess or cause trouble." "Why are you looking for work in Ellsworth?" Martha asked. "Where are you coming from?" "I was foreman on a ranch down in Texas," Carson explained, his voice straightforward and honest. "The owner died, and his son wanted to bring in his own people. Nothing personal, just the way of things. I have always wanted to see Kansas, so I figured this was as good a time as any to head north." Martha appreciated that he did not try to sweet-talk her or make excuses. She needed help and he appeared capable and honest. Still, she was careful. "I cannot pay much," she said. $30 a month, meals included, and you would sleep in the bunkhouse. It is clean but basic." "That is fair," Carson said. "When would you want me to start?" "Can you ride out with me now? I would like to see how you handle yourself around the animals before I make any firm commitments." Carson nodded and gestured toward a handsome bay gelding tied nearby. "I am ready when you are, Miss Franklin." They rode north together, and Martha found herself surprised by how comfortable the silence was between them. Many men felt the need to fill every moment with talking, but Carson seemed content to simply ride and observe the landscape. The rolling prairie stretched out in all directions, the new spring grass painting everything in shades of green that would turn gold by summer. "That is beautiful country," Carson finally said as they crested a hill and Martha's ranch came into view. The house was modest but well-maintained, a simple wooden structure with a porch that her father had built with his own hands. The barn was larger, with a corral and several smaller outbuildings scattered around the property. "It is home," Martha said simply, but she felt a small glow of pride at his words. Over the next hour, she watched Carson work with her horses. He had a calm, confident way about him that the animals responded to immediately. When one of the young geldings acted up, testing this stranger, Carson handled it with firm patience, never losing his temper or resorting to harshness. He examined the barn roof, correctly identifying the problem and explaining how he would fix it. He looked over her small herd of cattle with a knowledgeable eye, pointing out which ones looked like they might have good calves next season. "You have done well with this place," Carson said as they walked back toward the house. "It takes skill to keep a ranch running, especially alone." Martha felt heat rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "My father taught me everything. I just try to maintain what he built." "You are too modest," Carson said. "I can see improvements and repairs that show intelligence and hard work. This is your ranch now, Miss Franklin, not just your father's." They stood in the yard, and Martha made her decision. "The job is yours if you want it, Mr. Garrett. You can start today if that suits you." "It suits me fine," Carson said, and when he smiled, Martha noticed how it transformed his entire face, erasing years from his weathered features. The first week passed quickly. Carson proved to be everything he had claimed and more. He rose before dawn and worked until sunset, tackling the long list of repairs and maintenance that Martha had been struggling to keep up with. He fixed the barn roof, mended a quarter-mile of fence line, and began the patient work of training her young horses. Martha found herself cooking larger meals than she had in years, enjoying the excuse to make proper biscuits and stews instead of the simple fare she usually prepared for herself. Carson always thanked her sincerely for the food, and he insisted on helping clean up after supper despite her protests that it was not necessary. "My mother raised me to be useful," he said, drying the dishes while Martha washed. "She said a man who cannot take care of himself is only half grown, regardless of his age." "She sounds like a wise woman," Martha said. "She was," Carson agreed, his voice softening. "She passed about 10 years back. My father followed her within the year. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. They were married 42 years and rarely spent a night apart." "That must have been a wonderful thing to witness," Martha said wistfully. "That kind of devotion." "It was," Carson said, looking at her with those creek water eyes. "It set a high standard for what love should look like, made it hard to settle for anything less." Martha felt her breath catch slightly at the intensity of his gaze. She turned back to the washing basin, suddenly flustered in a way she had not felt in more years than she cared to count. On Sunday, Martha made the trip into Ellsworth for church services, something she tried to do at least twice a month. Carson asked if he might accompany her, saying he would like to meet some of the townspeople and get a better sense of the community. Martha's appearance at church with a handsome cowboy in tow caused quite a stir among the congregation. She could feel the eyes following them as they took a seat near the back. During the fellowship time after the service, several of the town's matrons approached with barely concealed curiosity. "Martha, dear," said Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife, "who is your companion?" "This is Carson Garrett," Martha said evenly. "He is my new ranch hand." "How nice," Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "It must be such a relief to have help at your age." Managing that ranch alone must have been exhausting. Martha felt the familiar sting of being reminded that she was considered past her prime, but before she could respond, Carson spoke up. "Miss Franklin has been managing that ranch better than most men could, madam," he said politely but firmly. "I have worked on spreads all over Texas, and I have rarely seen a place so well maintained by anyone, man or woman, young or old." Mrs. Henderson blinked in surprise at being contradicted, even so politely. "Well, yes, of course. I meant no disrespect." As they walked away, Martha glanced at Carson. "You did not need to defend me." "I know I did not need to," Carson said. "I wanted to. What that woman implied was disrespectful and untrue." "She was just saying what everyone thinks," Martha said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I am too old to be considered in the bloom of youth anymore." Carson stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Right there on the church steps, with half the town potentially watching, he said, "You are the perfect age for me, Martha Franklin. You are a grown woman who knows her own mind, who has proven she can build and maintain something worthwhile, who has strength and capability and intelligence. Any man who wants a silly young girl who needs constant guidance and cannot make her own decisions is a fool. I have always believed the best years of a woman's life are when she has lived enough to know who she is." Martha stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked at her the way Carson was looking at her now, with admiration and something deeper, something that made her feel warm all the way through. She started, then had to clear her throat. "That is very kind of you to say." "It is not kindness," Carson said. "It is the truth. I hope I have not spoken out of turn, but I wanted you to know how I see you, how I have seen you since the first moment we met." They rode back to the ranch in a charged silence, both of them acutely aware that something significant had shifted between them. Martha's mind was racing. She had accepted her solitary life, had made peace with the idea that romance was something that happened to other, younger women. But here was Carson, looking at her like she was someone worth pursuing, speaking to her like she was someone valuable and desirable. Over the following weeks, Carson continued to prove himself invaluable on the ranch, but it was the small, personal gestures that truly captured Martha's heart. He picked wildflowers and left them on the kitchen table. He took on the heavier chores without being asked, but never in a way that suggested he thought her incapable. He sought her opinion on ranch decisions and listened thoughtfully to her answers, clearly valuing her experience and knowledge. One evening in early June, they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the prairie in shades of gold and orange. The air was sweet with the scent of the wild roses that grew along the fence line. "I have something to tell you," Carson said, his voice serious. Martha felt her stomach clench with worry. Was he leaving? Had she misread everything between them? "When I came to Ellsworth, I was not just looking for work," Carson continued. "I mean, I was, but that was not the only reason I left Texas. There was a widow on a neighboring ranch who made it clear she was interested in marriage. She was a fine woman, only 25, pretty as a picture. Her late husband had left her well off, and she had 3 young children who needed a father." Martha's heart sank. Of course. A young, pretty, wealthy widow. Everything she was not. "Everyone expected me to court her," Carson went on. "It would have been a smart match from a practical standpoint, but I could not do it. I looked at her and felt nothing. No spark, no interest beyond basic respect. She was too young and we had nothing in common. She wanted someone to take over her life and make decisions for her, and that is not what I want. I want a partner, someone who has lived and learned and can stand beside me, not behind me. He turned to look at Martha directly. I want you, Martha. I have wanted you since that first day in town when you looked at me with those sharp eyes, sizing me up, not intimidated or impressed, just assessing honestly whether I was worth your time. I am 42 years old, and I have never married because I was waiting for someone who felt right. You feel right. Martha's hands were trembling. Carson, I am 38. I have no illusions about myself. My face has lines, my hands are rough from work, and I am set in my ways after living alone for so long. Your face has lines that show you have lived a real life, Carson said, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. Your hands are strong and capable, and being set in your ways just means you know what you want. Martha, I am not some young fool looking for a pretty decoration. I am a man who wants a real woman, one with substance and strength. I am a man who has fallen in love with you. Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. I have fallen in love with you too, she whispered. I tried not to. I told myself I was being foolish, that you could not possibly be interested in someone like me, but I could not help it. Carson leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as Martha responded. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Carson said, "Marry me, Martha. Let me be your husband and your partner. Let us build this ranch and this life together." "Yes," Martha said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Ellsworth. Martha wore a simple but lovely dress in deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Carson wore his Sunday best. The ceremony was small, with only a handful of townspeople in attendance, but it was perfect. Mrs. Henderson approached them after the ceremony with a tight smile. "Congratulations, Martha. I must say, this all happened quite quickly. When you find the right person, there is no sense in waiting," Martha said, her hand firmly clasped in Carson's. "Well, I suppose at your age, you cannot afford to wait too long," Mrs. Henderson said with false sweetness. Carson's jaw tightened, but Martha squeezed his hand and spoke before he could. "You are absolutely right, Mrs. Henderson. At our age, we are wise enough to know what we want and confident enough to pursue it without worrying about what others might think. It is quite liberating, actually. You should try it sometime." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish before she turned and walked away with an indignant huff. "That was magnificent," Carson said, grinning at his new wife. "I learned from the best," Martha said, smiling back at him. The wedding night was everything Martha had never allowed herself to hope for. Carson was patient and tender, making her feel cherished and desired. They talked late into the night, lying in the darkness of Martha's room, which was now their room, sharing stories and dreams. "I want to expand the herd," Carson said, idly running his fingers through Martha's hair, which she had let down for the first time in his presence. It fell past her shoulders, still thick and lustrous. "You have good stock, and with both of us working together, we could probably double the numbers within 2 years. "I have been wanting to do that for ages," Martha said, "but I was limited by what I could manage alone. With you here, we could really build something." "We will build something," Carson said firmly. "Together." Over the following months, they did exactly that. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Carson's expertise with cattle and horses complemented Martha's knowledge of the land and her business acumen. They worked from dawn to dusk, but they also took time to enjoy each other, stealing kisses in the barn, holding hands while walking the property, talking for hours on the porch as the sun set. The townspeople gradually accepted their marriage, though Martha caught whispers now and then about how scandalous it was that she had landed such a good man at her age. She learned to ignore them, focusing instead on the life she was building with Carson. In late October, Martha realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. At first, she assumed it was simply her age, perhaps the beginning of the change that women went through in their later years. But when she began feeling nauseated in the mornings and noticed her breasts becoming tender, she allowed herself to wonder if something else might be happening. She went to see Dr. Henderson without telling Carson, not wanting to raise his hopes if she was wrong. The doctor examined her thoroughly and then sat back with a surprised expression. "Well, Martha, I must say this is unexpected," he said, "but you are definitely with child. About 3 months along, I would estimate." Martha felt dizzy with shock and joy. "Are you certain?" "I am 38 years old. I assumed I was too old." "It is certainly less common at your age," Dr. Henderson admitted. "And I will not lie to you, there are more risks, but women have successfully carried and delivered babies at your age before. You are healthy and strong. I see no reason why you should not have a successful pregnancy, provided you take reasonable precautions." Martha rode home in a daze, her hand pressed protectively to her still flat stomach. A baby. She was going to have Carson's baby. After all these years of believing motherhood would never be part of her story, she was going to be a mother. Carson was mending fence when she arrived home. He looked up with the smile that always appeared when he saw her, then his expression shifted to concern as he took in her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately dropping his tools and coming to her. "Are you ill? Did something happen in town?" "I saw the doctor," Martha said, and watched Carson's face go pale with worry. She quickly continued, "I am fine. Better than fine. Carson, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Carson simply stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Martha, we are going to have a baby. I cannot believe it. I had accepted that I would never be a father, and now this is the most incredible news." "The doctor said there are risks because of my age," Martha felt compelled to warn him. "But he thinks if I am careful, everything should be fine." "We will be so careful," Carson said, cupping her face in his hands. "You will not overdo anything. I will take care of the heavy work. Oh, Martha, I am so happy I could burst." True to his word, Carson became almost comically protective. He insisted Martha rest frequently, prepared her breakfast every morning, and refused to let her lift anything heavier than a basket of eggs. At first, Martha found it amusing, then slightly irritating, and finally they reached a compromise where she promised not to overwork herself, and he promised not to treat her like she was made of glass. As her pregnancy progressed through the winter months, Martha found herself marveling at the changes in her body. She had never expected to experience this, and despite the discomforts, she felt a sense of wonder at the life growing inside her. "You want a boy or a girl?" Carson asked one snowy evening in January as they sat by the fire, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "I do not care," Martha said honestly. "I just want a healthy baby. What about you?" "The same," Carson said. "Though I confess, the idea of a daughter with your intelligence and strength appeals to me greatly." "Or a son with your kindness and skill with animals," Martha countered. The baby kicked and Carson's face lit up with delight. "Did you feel that? That was a strong one." "I felt it," Martha laughed. "This child is active. I think we are going to have our hands full." Winter gave way to early spring, and as Martha's due date approached, Carson became even more attentive if that was possible. He had converted one of the spare rooms into a nursery, building a beautiful wooden cradle with his own hands. Martha had sewn baby clothes from soft fabric she had purchased in town, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. On a mild April morning in 1879, Martha woke to the first contractions. Carson immediately went into town to fetch Dr. Henderson and Mrs. Cooper, an experienced midwife. Martha tried to stay calm, focusing on her breathing the way Mrs. Cooper had instructed during her visit the previous week. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on and Martha's pain increased, Dr. Henderson's expression grew more concerned. "The baby is in a slightly awkward position," he explained. "We may need to help things along." Martha was exhausted, sweating and scared, but she drew on the same strength that had allowed her to run the ranch alone for 5 years. She would bring this baby into the world safely. She had to. "You can do this," Carson said, holding her hand, his own face pale with worry. "You are the strongest woman I know, Martha. You can do this." With Mrs. Cooper's guidance and Dr. Henderson's assistance, Martha pushed with everything she had. Finally, after 18 hours of labor, a baby's cry filled the room. Martha collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "It is a boy," Mrs. Cooper announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A fine, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Martha's arms, and Martha looked down at her son with overwhelming love. He had a surprising amount of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same creek water color as his father's. He was perfect. "Our son," Martha whispered to Carson, who was openly crying as he looked at his wife and child. "Our son," Carson repeated, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately curled around his father's much larger finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names extensively, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son, Martha knew exactly what he should be called. "James," she said. "James Carson Garrett, after your father and you." "James," Carson said, testing the name. "It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect. I am the luckiest man alive." Dr. Henderson examined both Martha and the baby thoroughly before declaring them both healthy. "You did remarkably well, Martha," he said with genuine admiration. "Many younger women could not have endured what you just went through with such fortitude." After everyone left, Carson and Martha lay together in the bed with baby James between them, marveling at the miracle of their son. "I never thought I would have this," Martha said softly. "A husband, a baby, this kind of happiness. For so long I believed I had missed my chance." "You did not miss your chance," Carson said. "You were waiting for the right time, for the right person. We both were." Little James began to fuss, and Martha awkwardly tried to figure out how to nurse him. It took some trial and error, but eventually the baby latched on, and Martha felt a surge of fierce protective love. "We made this," she said in wonder. "You and I, we made this little person." "We did," Carson agreed. "And we are going to raise him to be strong and kind and good. He is going to know every day of his life that he is loved and wanted." The first few months of James's life were exhausting. Martha had thought running a ranch alone was tiring, but caring for an infant proved to be an entirely different kind of challenge. James was a colicky baby who cried frequently and slept in short, unpredictable bursts. Carson was an involved and devoted father, walking the floor with James during the night so Martha could get some rest, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to his son constantly in a soft, soothing voice that sometimes actually calmed the baby. "I think he might be teething early," Martha said one particularly difficult evening when James had been crying for hours despite all their efforts to soothe him. Carson gently rubbed the baby's gums with a clean finger and felt a small, sharp point. "You are right. I can feel a tooth coming through." They took turns comforting James through the worst of the teething pain, and gradually, their son became a happier, more settled baby. His personality began to emerge, revealing a curious and alert child who loved watching the ranch animals and listening to his parents talk. By the time James was 6 months old, life had settled into a new rhythm. Martha had learned to manage the ranch work around caring for her son, often carrying him in a sling against her chest while she did lighter chores. Carson continued to handle the heavier work, but he always made time to play with James, delighting in every milestone. "He smiled at me today," Carson announced proudly one evening. "A real smile, not just gas. He recognized me and smiled." Martha laughed at her husband's enthusiasm. "He has been smiling for weeks now, Carson." "Not at me like this," Carson insisted. "This was different." This was a daddy's boy smile. As the months passed, Martha found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in such a short time. 2 years ago, she had been alone, resigned to spinsterhood, considered too old for romance by everyone around her. Now she had a husband who loved her deeply, a son who brought joy to every day, and a ranch that was thriving beyond anything she had managed alone. One afternoon in late summer, while James napped in a basket in the shade and Martha and Carson worked together to repair a section of the corral, Martha said, "I want to thank you." Carson looked up from the post he was setting. "For what?" "For seeing me," Martha said. "For looking at me and seeing a woman worth pursuing, worth loving. For not caring what anyone else thought about my age or my circumstances. For giving me this life that I never thought I would have." Carson put down his tools and came to her, pulling her into his arms despite the dust and sweat. "Martha, you do not need to thank me. Loving you is not a favor I am doing you. It is the greatest privilege of my life. You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was drifting, working other people's ranches, never putting down roots or building anything lasting. You gave me a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything." They kissed, deep and sweet, until James woke with a cry that demanded attention. Martha went to pick him up, settling him on her hip with the practiced ease of an experienced mother, despite this being her first child. "Are you hungry, little one?" She cooed at the baby, who responded by grabbing a fistful of her hair and tugging, making both parents laugh. That evening, after James was asleep in his cradle, Martha and Carson made love with the passion and tenderness that still characterized their physical relationship. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Carson said, "I would like to have more children if you are willing. I know the first pregnancy and birth were hard on you, and I will not pressure you if you do not want to go through that again. But if you do, I would love for James to have siblings." Martha considered the question seriously. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth had been challenging. But holding James, watching him grow and develop, had been worth every moment of discomfort. "I would like that too," she said. "Let us see what happens. I am 39 now, so we may not have much time, but I would love to give James a brother or sister." 4 months later, Martha discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was kept so busy chasing after an increasingly mobile James that she had less time to dwell on discomforts. Carson was thrilled but anxious, remembering how difficult James's birth had been. "We should be extra careful this time," he said. "Maybe you should stay in town with Mrs. Cooper as the due date approaches." "I will be fine," Martha assured him. "Lightning does not strike twice. This baby will come easier, I can feel it." She was right. On a cool October evening in 1880, Martha went into labor while preparing dinner. Carson sent for help, but the baby came so quickly that Mrs. Cooper barely arrived in time. After only 4 hours of labor, Martha delivered a daughter. "A girl," Martha said. exhausted but elated as she held her daughter. "Carson, we have a daughter." Their daughter had her mother's features and a surprising amount of dark blonde hair. She was smaller than James had been but healthy and strong, with an impressive set of lungs that she demonstrated immediately. "She is beautiful," Carson said, his voice full of awe. "She looks just like you, Martha." They named her Lily Martha Garrett, and if Martha had thought she was busy before, adding a newborn to the mix while managing an active 18-month-old proved to be almost overwhelming. But Carson was a hands-on father, caring for James while Martha nursed Lily, playing with both children in the evenings, and somehow still managing to keep the ranch running smoothly. How do people manage with even more children? Martha asked one particularly chaotic day when James had knocked over a bucket of milk, and Lily had been crying for hours. "They survive, I suppose," Carson said, bouncing Lily while simultaneously trying to mop up the spilled milk with one hand. "Though I admit, I have newfound respect for large families." Despite the challenges, Martha loved being a mother. She loved watching James gently pat his baby sister's head, loved the way Lily's face would light up when she saw her parents, loved the feeling of completeness that came from having her family around her. By the time Lily was a year old, the ranch had grown significantly. Carson had successfully expanded the cattle herd, and they had begun breeding horses, which proved to be quite profitable. Martha handled the business side, negotiating sales and managing accounts, while Carson oversaw the actual animal management. They made an excellent team. One spring afternoon, while watching James chase butterflies and Lily toddle unsteadily after him, Martha said to Carson, "I am happy. Truly, deeply happy. I did not think this kind of happiness was possible." "I know exactly what you mean," Carson said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Every morning I wake up and look at you and our children, and I cannot believe this is my life." James ran up to them, holding a wildflower he had picked. "For you, Mama," he said, presenting it with the serious expression of a 3-year-old on an important mission. "Thank you, sweetheart," Martha said, taking the slightly crushed flower and tucking it behind her ear. "It is beautiful." Lily babbled something incomprehensible and held up her empty hands, clearly wanting to contribute even though she had nothing to give. Carson scooped her up and tickled her belly, making her shriek with laughter. As the years passed, the Garrett family continued to thrive. James grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved learning about the ranch and helping his father with the animals. Lily was more adventurous, always climbing things she should not and exploring every corner of the property with fearless curiosity. In the summer of 1885, when Martha was 45 years old and had long since assumed her childbearing years were over, she discovered she was pregnant once more. The news came as a shock to both her and Carson. "Are you sure?" Carson asked, his expression a mixture of joy and worry. "And is it safe? You are older now." "The doctor says everything looks fine," Martha said. "He warned me that there are risks, but he also said I am healthy and strong and there is no reason to assume there will be problems. I am surprised but happy." "What about you?" "I am happy too," Carson said, pulling her close, "and terrified, but mostly happy." This pregnancy was noticeably more difficult than the previous two. Martha tired more easily and her back ached constantly. But she refused to complain, focusing instead on preparing James and Lily, now 6 and 5 years old, for the arrival of a new sibling. "Will the baby be able to play with us?" James asked, his hand on Martha's swollen belly. "Not right away," Martha explained. "Babies are very small and need lots of care. But eventually, yes, the baby will be able to play with you, and you two will be wonderful big brother and sister." "I will teach the baby everything," Lily declared with the confidence of a 5-year-old. "I will show them how to climb trees and catch frogs. Let us wait until the baby is a bit older before the tree climbing lessons," Carson said, trying to keep a straight face. In March of 1886, Martha went into labor a week earlier than expected. This time, the birth was long and exhausting, taking nearly 24 hours. Dr. Henderson was concerned about Martha's age and the length of the labor, but Martha was determined. She had brought 2 healthy children into the world, and she would do it again. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, Martha delivered another son. He was small but healthy, with a loud cry that announced his arrival to the world. "Another boy," Dr. Henderson said with relief. "And he looks perfect. Martha, you are an absolute marvel. Not many women your age could have done what you just did." Martha was too exhausted to respond properly, but she managed a tired smile as she held her newest son. Carson looked at his wife with an expression of such profound love and admiration that it brought tears to her eyes. "You are amazing," he said softly. "Absolutely amazing." They named him Thomas William Garrett, and despite his dramatic entrance, he proved to be an easy, content baby. James and Lily were fascinated by their new brother, constantly wanting to hold him and help care for him. Gently, Martha had to remind them multiple times a day as overly enthusiastic hands reached for the baby. "He is still very small and delicate." The ranch required constant attention, but Carson had hired 2 additional hands over the years, which gave him more time to help Martha with the children. They had built a reputation as one of the most well-run operations in the area, known for quality cattle and horses. On Martha's 46th birthday, Carson surprised her by presenting her with the deed to an additional 80 acres of land adjacent to their property. "I purchased it with the profit from this year's horse sales," he explained. "I wanted you to have it in your name, to ensure that no matter what happens, you and the children will always have this land. But more than that, I wanted you to know that everything we have built together is as much yours as it is mine. More yours, really, since you built the foundation long before I arrived." Martha looked at the deed, her eyes filling with tears. "Carson, this is too much." "It is not nearly enough," Carson said. "Martha, you gave me a life I never dared to dream of. You gave me a home, children, a purpose. You took a wandering cowboy and made him part of something lasting. This land is just a small way of saying thank you." "I love you," Martha said, wrapping her arms around her husband. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Carson replied. "You are the perfect age for me, Martha Garrett. You always have been, and you always will be." As the children grew, the ranch continued to prosper. James developed a talent for working with horses, showing the same patient skill his father possessed. Lily proved to have a head for numbers and business, often helping Martha with the account books. Young Thomas was still too little to show particular talents, but he was a cheerful, affectionate child who brought joy to everyone around him. One evening when Thomas was 4 years old, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, as had become their tradition. James was 14 now, tall and lean like his father. Lily was 13, all energy and opinions. Thomas sat on Carson's lap, chattering away about the frog he had caught that afternoon. "Mama, Mrs. Henderson told me today that you were an old maid before you married Papa," Lily said suddenly. "What is an old maid?" Martha and Carson exchanged glances. "It is a term some people use for a woman who is not married," Martha explained carefully. "It is not a very kind term." "Were you really old when you married Papa?" James asked curiously. "I was 38, Martha said, which some people considered too old for romance or marriage." "But your father did not think so." "You are the perfect age for me," Carson said, repeating the words he had spoken so many years ago in front of the church. "You were then, and you are now." "But why would anyone think you were too old?" Lily persisted. "That does not make any sense." "People sometimes have silly ideas about age and what is appropriate," Carson said. "The truth is, your mother and I found each other at exactly the right time. If we had met when we were younger, we might not have been ready for each other. We needed to live our lives first to become the people we are now." "I am glad you found each other," James said seriously. "Otherwise, we would not be here." "That is very true," Martha said, reaching over to ruffle her son's hair. "And I cannot imagine my life without any of you." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the lonely years running the ranch alone, about the resignation she had felt when she believed romance had passed her by, about the miraculous day when Carson Garrett had walked into her life. "What are you thinking about?" Carson asked softly, as if sensing the direction of her thoughts. "About how wrong I was," Martha said. "I thought my life was settled, that I had missed my chance at love and family. I had accepted being alone. But then you came along and showed me that it was never too late, that I was not too old, that the best parts of my life were still ahead of me." "The best parts of both our lives," Carson corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, Martha. I was drifting through life, never putting down roots, never building anything lasting. You gave me everything I had been looking for without even knowing I was searching for it." Thomas had fallen asleep in Carson's arms, his small face peaceful and relaxed. Lily was leaning against Martha's shoulder, growing sleepy herself. James sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood with the knife his father had given him for his last birthday. "Let us get these children to bed," Martha said, standing and carefully picking up Lily, who murmured a sleepy protest but did not wake fully. After the children were tucked in and asleep, Martha and Carson returned to the porch, sitting close together on the bench Carson had built when they first married. "You ever regret it?" Martha asked. "Choosing me instead of that young widow in Texas or any of the other younger women you could have pursued?" Carson turned to look at her, his creek water eyes serious in the moonlight. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Martha, you are the love of my life. Age is just a number. What matters is who a person is inside, what they have to offer, how they make you feel. You make me feel like the best version of myself. You challenge me, support me, work beside me, and love me. That is worth more than youth or beauty or any other superficial quality." "I used to feel invisible," Martha confessed. "Especially after my father died. I would go into town and it was like I was not even there. The young women got all the attention, all the interest. I was just the old spinster running her father's ranch." "Their loss," Carson said. "Any man who could not see your worth was a fool not deserving of you anyway. I am just grateful that you were still available when I finally showed up. If you had married someone else, I do not know what I would have done." "Probably married that pretty widow and lived a perfectly nice life," Martha teased gently. "No," Carson said seriously. "I would have kept searching until I found you, because there is no one else like you, Martha. You are one of a kind." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie at night. An owl hooted in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called out to its pack. "I want the children to know their story," Martha said suddenly. "I want them to understand that love can come at any age, that it is never too late to find happiness. I want them to know that societal expectations and judgments do not matter nearly as much as finding someone who truly sees you and values you. We will teach them," Carson promised. "Not just with words, but with how we live our lives. They can see every day how much we love and respect each other. They can see that a good marriage is built on partnership and friendship and genuine affection, not just youth and passion. "We have plenty of passion," Martha said with a slight blush that Carson could probably not see in the darkness, but that he surely heard in her voice. "That we do," Carson agreed with a low laugh. "Age has not diminished that at all." Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James fell in love at 19 with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a practical and capable young woman who reminded Carson of Martha when she was younger. They married and built a house on the far corner of the Garrett property, starting their own herd with the help of both families. "I am too young to be a grandmother," Martha protested laughingly when James announced his engagement. "You are the perfect age to be a grandmother," Carson countered, echoing his favorite phrase. "Just as you are the perfect age for everything else." When James and his wife welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Martha in honor of her grandmother, Martha held the baby and felt the circle of life completing itself. She thought about her own mother, who had died so young, and wished she could have known her grandchildren. She vowed to be present and active in her grandchildren's lives for as long as possible. Lily chose a different path, declaring at 17 that she wanted to attend a teaching college in the East. It was an unusual choice for a ranch girl, but Carson and Martha supported her decision, proud of her ambition and intelligence. "Are you sure?" Martha asked as they prepared for Lily to leave. "It will be so different from everything you know here." "I am sure," Lily said confidently. "I love the ranch, and I will always come home, but I want to see more of the world, to learn and experience things beyond Kansas. Besides, someone needs to prove that ranch girls can be just as educated and accomplished as city girls." "That is my daughter," Carson said proudly, hugging Lily tightly. "Go show them what you are made of." Thomas, the youngest, showed no desire to leave the ranch. He loved the land and the animals with a passion that matched his parents. "This is where I belong," he said simply when asked about his plans for the future. "I want to build my life here, just like you and Mama did." In the spring of 1899, Carson and Martha celebrated their 21st wedding anniversary. Martha was 59 years old now and Carson was 63. Both showed the signs of a life spent working outdoors, but they were healthy and active, still running the ranch with the help of their children and hired hands. 21 years, Martha marveled as they sat on the porch, now a tradition spanning more than 2 decades. "It seems impossible that so much time has passed." "Best 21 years of my life," Carson said. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Martha. Even the hard days, the challenging days, they have all been worth it because I got to spend them with you." "Do you remember what Mrs. Henderson said at our wedding?" Martha asked. "About how at my age I could not afford to wait too long." "I remember wanting to tell her exactly what I thought of that comment," Carson said with a slight grimace. "Well, she was right in a way," Martha said thoughtfully. "Not in the way she meant, but right nonetheless. At our age, we understood that life is precious and time is limited. We did not waste time with silly games or pretense. We knew what we wanted and went after it. Young people have the luxury of thinking they have forever. We knew better." "That is true," Carson agreed. "Though I would argue we did have forever. We just made better use of it than most people do." They watched the sunset, a sight they had shared thousands of times but that never grew old. The prairie stretched out before them, the land they had worked and loved for so many years. "What do you want to do with the rest of our forever?" Martha asked. "Exactly what we have been doing," Carson said. "Running this ranch, watching our grandchildren grow, loving you more with each passing day. I do not need anything more complicated than that." "That sounds perfect," Martha agreed. As the new century dawned, The Garrett Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built with hard work, love, and partnership. Martha and Carson had proven that age was no barrier to finding true love and building a meaningful life together. They had created not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. On Martha's 60th birthday, the entire family gathered for a celebration. James was there with his wife and 3 children, the youngest named Carson after his grandfather. Lily had returned from the East with her husband, a professor she had met at college, and their 2-year-old son. Thomas, now 24 and recently married, stood with his young wife, who was expecting their first child in a few months. 60 years old, Martha said, shaking her head in wonder. I never imagined I would reach this age surrounded by so much love and so many people. You deserve every bit of it, Carson said, standing to make a toast. To my beautiful wife, who has given me and everyone in this room more than we could ever repay. You showed me that love knows no timeline, that the right person is worth waiting for, and that age is just a number compared to the content of someone's character. Hear, hear, the family chorused, raising their glasses. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Martha and Carson sat together in the bedroom they had shared for more than 2 decades. You know what the best part of today was? Martha asked. What? Carson replied, helping her out of her dress as he had done countless times before. Looking around that room and seeing all those people, all those lives that exist, because you walked into the general store in Ellsworth one day in 1878 and asked about a job. Every single person there, every bit of joy and love and laughter, it all stems from that moment when you decided I was the perfect age for you. It stems from the moment you decided to take a chance on a wandering cowboy, Carson corrected. You could have sent me away, hired someone younger or more established. But you gave me an opportunity, and through that opportunity, I found everything I had been searching for. They lay down together, fitting naturally into the comfortable positions of long familiarity. Carson's arm wrapped around Martha, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I love you, Martha whispered. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for wanting me when I thought I was too old to be wanted, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you too, Carson replied. Thank you for being exactly who you are, for teaching me that the best things in life are worth waiting for, and for proving that love can bloom at any age. As they drifted off to sleep, Martha thought about the young woman she had been, resigned to a solitary life, convinced that romance had passed her by. She wished she could go back and tell that woman not to give up hope, that her greatest adventure was still ahead of her, that the love of her life was coming, and that he would see her not as too old, but as the perfect age. The years continued their steady march forward. Carson and Martha grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of time and hard work, but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, and continued to work the ranch as long as their bodies allowed. When Martha was 65, Carson surprised her by having a photographer come from town to take a formal portrait of the two of them. They dressed in their best clothes and stood together in front of the house they had shared for so many years. Why now? Martha asked as the photographer set up his equipment. Because I want to capture this moment, Carson said. I want our descendants to see us as we are now, still together, still in love, still standing strong after all these years. I want them to see proof that age does not diminish love, it deepens it. The resulting photograph showed a distinguished older couple, clearly marked by time but standing close together with unmistakable affection in their expressions. Carson's hand rested on Martha's shoulder, and Martha's hand reached up to cover his. Their faces showed the lines and weathering of a lifetime spent outdoors, but their eyes were bright and their smiles genuine. That photograph would hang in the Garrett family home for generations, a reminder of a love that defied societal expectations and proved that it was never too late to find happiness. Carson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Martha holding his hand. He simply did not wake one morning, his heart finally giving out after a life fully lived. Martha grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that they had been given 15 wonderful years together, every one of them a precious gift. She lived another 8 years after Carson's death, continuing to be involved with the ranch and her family. She told her story often, especially to her granddaughters and great-granddaughters, wanting them to know that a woman's value did not diminish with age, that love could come at any time, and that the right person would see you as perfect exactly as you are. On a warm spring day in 1907, at the age of 67, Martha Franklin Garrett passed away surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were about Carson, saying that she could see him waiting for her and that he looked just as handsome as the day they met. She was buried next to her husband on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children: the perfect age for love. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, each generation adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation that Martha and Carson had built. The story of how they met and fell in love became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that love knows no timeline and that the right person is always worth waiting for. James, the eldest, lived to be 92, always maintaining that his parents had the greatest love story he had ever witnessed. He told his grandchildren about how his mother had been considered too old for romance, until a cowboy named Carson Garrett rode into town and saw her not as she was perceived, but as she truly was: capable, intelligent, strong, and absolutely perfect. Lily became a respected educator and writer, eventually penning a book about frontier women that featured her mother's story prominently. She wrote about how society often dismissed women past a certain age as having no value beyond their past contributions, and how her mother had proven that some of life's greatest chapters could begin later than anyone expected. Thomas never left the ranch, raising his own family on the same land his parents had worked. He named his first daughter Martha and taught all his children about their grandmother's strength and their grandfather's wisdom in recognizing it. The house that Martha had inherited from her father, which she had shared with Carson, and where they had raised their children, stood for more than a century. It was eventually designated a historical site, recognized not just for its architectural significance, but for the story it represented about love, determination, and defying societal expectations in the Old West. Visitors to the site would hear the story of Martha Franklin, the woman who ran a ranch alone and was considered past her prime for romance, and Carson Garrett, the cowboy who saw her not as too old but as the perfect age. They would hear about how these two people built not just a successful ranch, but a family and a legacy that endured for generations. The phrase, "the perfect age," became something of a family motto for the Garrett descendants, a reminder that it was never too late to start a new chapter, to find love, to pursue dreams. It was a rejection of society's arbitrary timelines and limitations, an affirmation that people should be valued for who they are, not how old they are. In the end, Martha and Carson's story was about more than just two people finding love. It was about courage, about the bravery required to remain open to possibility, even when the world suggested you should close that door. It was about vision, about seeing potential and value where others saw only limitations. It was about partnership, about two people building something greater together than either could have achieved alone. But most of all, it was about love, pure and simple. The kind of love that looks beyond superficial qualities to see the person underneath. The kind of love that grows stronger with time rather than fading. The kind of love that creates ripples extending far beyond the original couple, touching lives for generations to come. Martha Franklin had believed she was too old for romance, that her chance had passed her by. Carson Garrett had proven her wrong with 5 simple words. "You are the perfect age for me." Those words had changed not just Martha's life, but the lives of countless descendants who would never have existed without that moment of recognition and appreciation. The prairie winds still blow across the Kansas plains, rustling through the same grasses that Martha and Carson knew. The ranch buildings have been renovated and preserved, standing as monuments to what can be built with determination and love. And somewhere in the great beyond, 2 souls who found each other at exactly the right time, regardless of what anyone else thought, remain together still, forever the perfect age for each other.